Filling up shelf space is the easy part of being a board game enthusiast. Finding time to play all the games and giving them the proper attention, however, is a totally different story. With an ever-expanding library pushing the boundaries of my shelf space, the inevitable time has come to sell some games. Does this sound familiar? Well, this video is made for you. And I do not claim to have all the wisdom, but I recently sold a part of my collection and I'd like to share some of my experiences so far. Let me tell you about my considerations regarding which games to sell. So this video is divided in 5 different tips, which things to take in consideration before you sell off your board games. For your convenience, we left timestamps in the description of this video, starting off with number 1. The first obvious consideration you need to make is whether you still enjoy the games in your collection. Perhaps you were too easily swayed by the hype during a crowdfunding campaign and the games in your collection did not meet your expectations. These should be the first games to get rid of. In my opinion, a game collection reflects your own personal preferences. Each game in an actively played collection should be a meaningful addition serving its own purpose. In my case, I sold Human Punishment the Beginning for this very reason. I had very high hopes for this game, but after a couple of playthroughs I concluded that the game did not meet my expectations. The Kickstarter campaign looked very promising, but in practice the game is overdoing itself, becoming too complex and too sluggish for my liking. One playthrough easily cost me 4 hours and the flow of the game is constantly interrupted by the annoying event phases where players need to vote. Human Punishment was an easy pick when I started to sell part of my collection. Well, let me add that it was an easy pick once I accepted my losses, because there was no way I could ever recover my loss with the sale of this Kickstarter campaign. A second consideration I made was thinking of games that overstayed their welcome. These aren't necessarily games that I don't like, these are games that I played so extensively that they had a rare chance of offering any new gameplay experiences. Some games I never grow tired of, but the majority run still after a while. For this very reason I sold Dead of Winter. I struggled convincing myself to get rid of this game. I had such a blast playing this game, but the events offered by the Crossroad cards felt like a repetition exercise once I have encountered them several times. Dead of Winter The Long Night and even Dead of Winter Warring Colonies extended the game's lifespan, but eventually the game couldn't offer any new experiences anymore. Selling games that my board game group do not like to play was a tougher consideration to make. I like to think of board gaming being a highly social activity, and I equally like making a team effort to beat the game or beating other board gamers at a tight game. But both options require some friends to play the game. But if they rather play another game, it's going to be very hard to table the game. Xenoshift serves as a great example as a game that could not please several gamers within the 1D6 board game group. Xenoshift was my very first Kickstarter campaign, so it took some pondering to decide to get rid of the game, but the fact that my friends didn't want to play the game ultimately tipped the scales. And speaking of friends, their collection also affected my opinion on selling several games. Our gaming group has some very solidified players who rarely skip a board game night. If we combine our libraries, we have multiple copies of several games. For instance, William and I both had Terraforming Mars in our collections. We don't play Terraforming Mars very often and keeping 2 copies of the same game felt pretty meaningless, so I sold mine. I can imagine that the same will happen for Truthfang Legends and The Witcher Old World, while games like ISIS Vanguard and Nemesis will tend to stick around despite of being a duplicate in our collections. A final consideration I've made was selling board games that were obsoleted by other games. Black Rose War serves as a great example. The game had a certain purpose in my collection. I bought it to accommodate a larger player group, but found other games that were better suited for these situations. As a result, Black Rose Wars rarely hit our table, and that's why I sold this game too. For pretty much the same reason I sold Ankh. I backed the Ankh campaign on Kickstarter after falling in love with Blood Rage. I hoped for an even better game because Ankh was the last part of the same trilogy as Blood Rage, but it was a bit of a disappointment. In my opinion, Blood Rage is more accessible and streamlined, giving Ankh a hard time competing to get played on our table. So these were my main considerations when I started to sell some of my board games. I sold games I didn't like, ones I overplayed, games my gaming group didn't like, games that had multiple copies in our collection, and games that were obsoleted by other games. In the end, I sold Ankh, Black Rose Wars, Terraforming Mars, Xeno Shift, Dead of Winter, Human Punishment The Beginning, and also Stockpile, The 51st State, Stellar Expedition and Zombicide. Bidding farewell to all of these games worries me a little. Did I make the right decisions parting with these games? I'm a guy who constantly is looking for new board game experiences, but I can't help feeling nostalgic sometimes, just longing for a classic game to play. Time will tell if I made the right decisions, and if I ever feel I made a wrong decision, I can still check if there's an app or a computer game version of the game available. I'm curious to hear your opinion on the board games that I've sold. Did I make the right decisions here, or should I have kept certain titles? Whatever your opinion is, I have some empty shelves that can be filled with new board games again, so that's a good thing. Thanks for now for joining me on this reflection, and I'll see you in the next video.